Good morning. It is Sunday, January 23rd. This was budget week at the state capitol. Governor Brian Kemp pitches a spending plan that he hopes will help retain more state workers. Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis requests a special grand jury as she looks into former President Donald Trump. And we pay tribute to a Georgia gang legend. This week's panel, Phil, Theron, and Melita weigh in on those topics and more. And it all starts right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Hello and thanks for joining us. I'm Claire Sims in for Lori Geary. Governor Brian Kemp presented his budget this week in a joint hearing of the House and Senate Appropriations Committees. And one of the biggest priorities is to tackle state turnover.
I recognize that state employees have not had a cost of living adjustment to their salaries since before the Great Recession.
Governor Brian Kemp's budget plan includes a $5,000 raise for all full-time benefit-eligible state employees. The governor cited increased employee turnover, staffing challenges, and increased training costs, something state agency leaders echoed in their remarks to state lawmakers.
We have a pretty tremendous turnover in headcount. Just being able to keep employees employed in the department.
It's going to boost the morale of our employees. It's going to help us to retain the employees that we have. Today, we have 14% attrition rate.
The most shocking numbers came from the Department of Juvenile Justice, which reported a 90% turnover rate this fiscal year in juvenile correctional officers. That's down from 97% the year before. In addition to raises, the governor also plans to make the state's 401k program more competitive.
I'll also be introducing legislation that we look forward to working with you all on to increase the employer match for 401k contributions for employers under the GSEPS plan from 3% to 9%.
Those contribution amounts would be based on employees' length of service. So, Melita, I want to start with you. Do you think this is going to help sort of stop the bleeding when it comes to state employees?
It will help stop the bleeding, but prudence would have urged this happening earlier, before the problems arose. And the budget surplus is a result of not having passed along these raises to teachers and state employees in the past.
Phil, what do you think?
Well, we're having a surplus because of some of the extra federal money that's coming in too. I think this is a pretty good budget package. We do have the revenue, as you're pointing out, and it's desperately needed in terms of especially the corrections part of state government. That's always been a problem, and you need to boost these employees' pay. I'm glad to see about the 401k. So these are needed things that, yeah, we hopefully wished we could have done last year, but this is good.
Theron?
What's very interesting is that the timing of it. I mean, I think that while I do agree with Melita, we could have done this actually sooner, but the fact that the governor is doing this, I mean, I remember being a state employee, and that 3% to 9% is a big jump in 401k. And so we heard a lot about, his recommitment to making sure that we retain state employees. But Claire, I've talked about it on this show before. We had a lot of people in state government agencies that had an interim title for a very, very long time. They were never really sort of promoted. And you had a lot of deputies sort of, waiting to see if they were going to actually be able to lead the departments. And so I think also in this budget, the state will be able to fill a lot of these vacant positions, not just because of the recent, people leaving, but a lot of the retention sort of concerns that people have had for years.
All right. Let's move on now to one of the candidates running to replace Governor Kemp. This week, David Perdue told Fox News he would create a special new law enforcement unit to investigate election fraud in Georgia. Phil, is that not what the Secretary of State's office already does?
Well, no, we need to do a better job. In fact, there's been a move to also have the GBI investigate too. We need to have outside agencies to help. We've all talked about the election dysfunction that we've occurred. We all covered, for example, the 2020 elections and the mess that occurred there in Fulton County and elsewhere. So these are good ideas.
Melita, didn't the GBI come in this last go round?
Well, Speaker Ralston and Governor Kemp both want the GBI to be involved, and they would have a $500,000 budget item for those 5 GBI agents, in addition to the 23 investigators already in the Secretary of State's office. So I think that would give more credibility, and it would give an outside look at any allegations of voter fraud. But we need to remember There was not voter fraud
Oh, come
in
on.
2020, and countless investigations and 3 ballot counts proved that.
Fulton County, Melita, Fulton County. That's all I can say.
To really echo, and I'm just agreeing with Melita today. She's on fire. But I think that, listen, let's remind our viewers. I mean, we had 3 recounts. We had almost 15 audits, right? And then some of them came back and sort of questioned, but there was no actual voter fraud that happened. And so to push back on my good friend Phil, there is a department, Claire, within the Secretary of State's office that does exactly what Senator Perdue is proposing. But let's just call this for what it is. It is a race to the right with Republicans, particularly Republicans who have tough primaries. And so what he's trying to do is that he's proposing and pushing a narrative that a lot of Trump supporters believe that this election was stolen, that basically Governor Kemp could have done more. And if you look at what the Kemp campaign was able to say right away, is that this is basically saying that his campaign is basically an entire lie. And so while there are those out there that think that we need to improve some of the election irregularities that we have with our system, but I definitely think that the Secretary of State's office did a thorough job of investigating these claims, and there was just no fraud.
All right, Melita wants to jump in real quick, and then Phil will let you end
since
it.
I got 2 Democrats here, I want to get in.
I will.
Purdue's proposal is just a copycat of the one being floated by Ron DeSantis in Florida.
Phil.
Well, a couple things. In my House district in Sandy Springs, it's been documented, I've told you this, we had thousands of people that voted out of district. I'm just going to give one example. Now, even your own President Biden says there may be a problem with fraud in 2022. So he's echoing Donald Trump in the fraud accusations. So I think that you have to have policing with regard especially to Fulton County and some of these other key counties. I don't see anything wrong with it. By the way, you have to call in the GBI. They just can't come in right now.
All right, we have to get to this. Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis has now asked for a special grand jury to look into the allegations of Donald Trump and what he did in Georgia following the 2020 election. Theron, what do you think this means for that investigation?
I think the district attorney is doing her job. I mean, this actually took her a while to get to this conclusion. I believe, Claire, that she talked to many folks within her department, outside counsel, to make sure that there was evidence there. Is there a cause to really sort of, call for this investigation? So ultimately, I think if you really take the politics out of it, let's not forget, you had a president of the United States of America who tried to basically stop democracy. He broke the law by trying to overturn the will of the people in Georgia. And so I definitely think that should be investigated.
Phil, I can see you want to weigh in.
Well, let me just say this. It's a waste of time and resources and money by Fonnie Willis's office. You've got thousands and thousands of cases that are backlogged. She should be working on that, and her staff. If you want to take the president to court, probably it's best to do it at the federal level and then just to do playing politics to the Democrat base. I think that's probably what she's doing. And I like Fonnie Willis. She's done some good things. This is very disappointing.
All right, Melita.
I disagree with Phil respectfully. She's doing precisely what the law calls for her to do by asking the chief judge, and he will require the majority of the sitting 19 Fulton Superior Court judges to impanel this special grand jury. But it requires a special grand jury to have the time and the subpoena power and the power to promote the production of documents to thoroughly look at this. And in her call, she outlined the other agencies which had conflicts of interest and could not conduct this investigation. So it's not going to be a waste of time or resources. We need to show and demonstrate clearly that nobody can subvert the will of the voters.
All right.
This is about that phone call that Brad
Yes.
Raffensperger had with President Trump, just so the viewers understand what we're talking about. And I don't understand why this doesn't have to be in federal court. We're parsing words about you need to find 11,000 whatever it was votes. And I know Democrat attorneys and Republican attorneys say there's nothing there. I mean, it can be interpreted in several different ways. You don't know what was in the mind of the president. So again, a waste of time, resources, and money.
Well, 11,780 votes President Trump wanted to find, and he said yesterday in the Huffington Post in a statement from his campaign, "My phone call to the Secretary of State of Georgia was perfect."
Well, he was worried about fraud. What's wrong with that? So
All
are the
right.
Democrats worried about fraud,
He just needs to accept the election results. All right, he lost.
like Stacey Abrams did?
All right, we're going to have to move on. When we come back, federal voting rights legislation hits another roadblock. We'll discuss.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
We have been summoned here by history. This is not just another routine day in the Senate. This is a moral moment.
We in the United States Senate have an obligation to defend the legacy of Congressman John Lewis, to stand up for the sacred franchise, to secure equal access to the ballot for every single American voter.
Despite now viral speeches from Georgia Senators Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff, the Senate blocked the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act from moving forward Wednesday. Democrats also failed to pass a change to filibuster rules. Now, Theron, what do you think this means for that legislation moving forward?
You know, I was in Washington, D.C. this week, Claire, and I actually got a chance to spend a little time with Senator Warnock. And, you know, you played a brief snippet of his speech for our viewers. And I would say, and I think Melita would agree with me, probably not Phil, but this is probably one of the best speeches I've heard, not just Reverend Raphael Warnock give, but a U.S. Senator. And he talked about how, while he probably knew that that vote was not going to pass, he still loves this country, but it's a shame that we can't even have members of our own party, particularly two U.S. Senate Democrats, agree to deal with the filibusters rule to basically just give an up and down vote on the John Lewis Voting Rights Freedom Act. And I think also to kind of paraphrase something that Senator Ossoff said, who, you know, was very close to Congressman Lewis and was very close to us as a staff, is that, you know, there are many Republicans out here that want to sort of mention his name, and I want to make sure he says to basically use Congressman Lewis's name to signal your virtue while you work to erode his legacy and defy his will. And I thought that was a very, fitting and appropriate comment from Senator Ossoff to talk about many Republicans who, by the way, posted on MLK Day all these quotes from MLK, all these quotes from Dr. C.T. Vivian, Congressman John Lewis, Dr. Lowry, and then they sat there on the floor of the Senate and wouldn't even let the people get a vote on a very important issue that not only matters to Democrats, not only matters to black people, it matters to Americans.
And Republicans, right?
Well, everybody's in favor of voting rights. This is a misnamed bill. It actually is the voter regulation bill. It would dynamite all 50 state control of elections. John Lewis wasn't right on everything, although he was respected on both sides of the aisle, and he was certainly wrong on this one. And I have to say, Theron, and you're up in D.C., and you probably saw where Republican Senator Ted Cruz had formed a bipartisan coalition of Democrats and Republicans to sanction Russia on its pipeline going into Europe. What did the Democrats do? They blocked it using the so-called horrible racist filibuster. So it's hypocrisy, it's about power. The Democrats don't care about the filibuster. They just used it the other day while they were blasting Republicans for using it.
Melita.
I think what we'll see now is a turn on the old phrase about eating the elephant one bite at a time. So since the Republicans didn't buy into the omnibus voting rights bill, that bill will be fed to them one bite at a time in small segments, and we will see just how Republicans feel about voting rights one issue at a time over the coming weeks.
All right.
You'll have to see how some of your Democrats like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema do it, because Democrats opposed this bill too.
All right.
Yeah, their day is coming though.
What does that mean?
No, I'm just saying.
You're going to primary them?
Well, actually, Sinema will be primaried, and Emily's List, the women's organization, which was her primary funder when she was elected, has already said they will not support her if she does not support voting rights. And holding people accountable for how they vote once they're elected is a key tenet.
I want to move quickly to this. The president had only his second press conference of his term this week, and he did, though, spend about 2 hours answering questions from the press. I don't really want to ask for grades here, but Phil, I'll start with you. How do you think this went?
F. It was terrible. It was confusing. He made gaffes. He had to be cleaned up by the White House the next day just to take a couple things on Ukraine. What a serious gaffe that was to muse. He sounded like a pundit. He was musing about, gee, maybe Putin will invade. I couldn't blame him. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. And then a minor incursion into a sovereign country. And then the White House spent the last 2 days cleaning that up. This is terrible. I hate to say it, but he keeps making all of these mistakes and gaffes. This is not a great way to run the country. No wonder the Democrats are in the tank, including his polling numbers, 40% and under. So this is a huge problem.
Theron, was it a win for transparency, though?
Well, look, I mean, President Biden actually, you know, I thought he did well. I'm not going to get into grading, but ultimately, I think what the American people want to know is what the president is thinking. What is he going to do about inflation? What is he going to do to make sure we protect the homeland? What is he going to do to continue to fight this deadly pandemic? And so while Phil likes to sort of say it was, you know, he was all over the place and, you know, wasn't coherent, I disagree. I think that what you're going to see from President Biden at a time where, you know, now he's 1 year into his tenure as president, is that he's going to go back to some of his old campaign ways. I think he's going to speak directly to the American people. He's going to talk about kitchen table issues that matter to them most. And ultimately, yeah, every now and then he may say a couple things that people may not agree with. But let's not forget the things that Donald Trump said will go down as history as F and the worst that we've ever heard from an American president.
All right, we have to move on.
I mean, he still thinks there's not a problem with inflation and rising gas prices. He thinks we're okay.
We have to move on. Coming up, a longtime Georgia congressman faces a new challenger. The panel's thoughts just ahead.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Former State Senator Vincent Fort has announced he will challenge longtime Democratic Congressman David Scott for his seat in the 13th District. And Fort says that Scott is too conservative. We're going to welcome in the fourth member of our panel. Martha is joining us via Zoom, I believe. Martha, what do you think about that?
Well, far be it from me to complain about primaries and parties, but I do think that this is a big mistake for Vincent Fort. I mean, David Scott has served very well, and is he too conservative? I don't think so. He has worked with people throughout, whether they're Democrats in Congress, Republicans in Congress. David Scott, I think, will win the primary.
All right, Melita or Theron.
Well, it's not a surprise for Fort to seek the congressional seat. He served as a senator for 2 decades, and he obviously misses being in the arena. And I think Scott has received increasing criticism for his performance recently. Not only is he walking with a cane, but there was a long Politico article earlier in the week about his performance as chair of the Agriculture Committee. And that's an important role for Georgia because the Ag bill is up for reauthorization, and that's a very key commitment that's important to all of rural Georgia and agriculture throughout the United States.
Theron, did you want to weigh in?
I know both of these gentlemen very well. Let's just start with Congressman David Scott, who actually I had the pleasure of actually riding up on Delta to D.C. with this week and had a chance to speak with the congressman. And I would tell you this, I mean, he's fired up. He's defiant. I mean, he used the terms that, look, you know, I know folks are doubting me, but he mentioned, you know, he's battle tested. This is not the first time clarity he's had primary opposition. But Senator Fort is a real deal. You got to take him seriously. The fact that he's running in this race against David Scott makes me believe that he feels that there's an avenue there. But ultimately, I think it's going to come down to money. I think it's going to come down to constituent services, and I think Congressman Scott does a really good job there. But Senator Fort is a really, really well-respected Democrat, not only in the state of Georgia, but nationally. And so we'll just see if someone else maybe jumps in that race as well.
We'll see what happens. The MARTA Board of Directors has named Collie Greenwood as the interim CEO after the tragic death of Jeffrey Parker last weekend. Theron, I know you wanted to talk about this.
Yeah, you know, I just wanted to first and foremost extend my sincere condolences to the family of Jeff Parker, particularly his wife Erin and his 2 daughters. This was something that really hit me near and dear to my heart. Jeff Parker is a friend. I was a friend and will always be a friend of mine, but also a client at MARTA. And, you know, it was obviously a suicide, which, you know, really makes us all stop and pause and realize what's most important in this world, and that is family. And if you have a friend or loved one who's going through something mentally, we've got to sometimes stop what we're doing and make sure that person, he or she, seeks help. And so definitely a big loss for this state, a big loss for this region. What he was doing at MARTA was transformational. I mean, it was amazing. He that week and did a really, upbeat State of the MARTA, talked about a bold future for MARTA and transit, and so definitely he's going to be missed.
Okay. We're going to have to leave it there.
I just want to echo what Theron said. He did a great job with MARTA, and we are going to miss him.
All right. Thank you. We'll be right back.
Absolutely.
Well said. Thank you. Very sad.
Dick Williams. From the studios of Fox 5 Atlanta, here's the Georgia Gang.
And good morning. We're glad you could be with us.
For more than 35 years, Dick Williams brought Atlantans to the table every Sunday morning as one of the original members of the Georgia Gang. The public affairs program began in the early 80s, and Williams, who started his career in print journalism, set the tone.
Newspapers tend to cover more substantive issues of government and politics. And so our job, as I see it, is to bring that coverage of government policy and politics to an audience that's eager to receive that, to hear that.
Williams decided to retire in 2019 and sat down with Fox 5 anchor Russ Spencer to reflect on his career and the impact of this beloved program.
The whole idea was to disagree without being disagreeable and to bring all sides of an issue into the discussion. And I think over the 36 years that we've been on the air, we've succeeded in that.
Williams was 77 years old. I'm getting choked up. Phil, take it away.
Well, that was a very nice package you put together there, Claire, and I'm wearing as a tribute to our fallen leader of the Georgia Gang, his legendary bow tie that he wore. In fact, I think that you could just reflect on his legacy a bit. It was journalism. He also spent, I think, 3 decades running up and down basketball courts as refereeing. And Melita and I were talking about that there was something in the 80s and 90s right up until 2000 called the Cracker Crumble that was sponsored by the Georgia Press Association, and it was spoofs and mocking of politicians and song and dances. He would sing, and he was a Republican without rhythm, by the way. But also, I think that we were a great conservative duo on the show, and he brought in me in 2003, and he brought in Theron, and of course he said he wanted us to debate and stir the pot a little bit. Have we followed his instructions?
I think we've given him.
But anyhow, condolences, of course, to his family. We're thinking of Dick.
Yeah, I'll go quick. I would just say to Phil's point, and I actually wore a bow tie on his last show. Phil worked with me to try to get a bow tie for this show, but this didn't work out. But I would just want to, send my condolences to the Williams family. Dick took a chance on me. Jeff Dickerson, who I know is here, had a lot of stories with Dick. And Jeff came to me and said, hey, I need an alternate. Had breakfast with Dick. He said, look, I want someone who brings a different perspective to the show, someone who's maybe in the game, campaigns, lobbying at the Capitol, at City Hall. And so that was the type of forward-thinking leader he was, and I had a chance to text with him a little bit last week, and of course, in Dick Williams fashion, said, hey, I love this new venture that you and Lori Geary are doing, Authenticity Partners. It's something you should be doing, but I don't know if I agree with the name. And it's just the type of personality that Dick has, so definitely he's going to be missed.
All right, we're going to let Martha weigh in now.
Dick was such a mentor to me and gave me the biggest break in my career. He brought me onto the Georgia Gang in 2000, and for 10 years I was on nonstop, and I'm back now, which is great. He was a great husband and father and a faithful person. That's one of the things I loved about him. We talked about that, but more importantly, he put other people first, and we talked frequently, and I'm just going to miss him so much. I would not be sitting here today if it were not for Dick Williams. He was an amazing man.
All right, and Melita.
Well, my fondest memories of Dick Williams have to do with the early 80s when this show was in its beginning. And so many of us hung out at Manuel's Tavern and we talked politics and disagreed in an agreeable fashion. And I think that's something that he excelled at. And then the other thing is, in so many of the tributes to him, people talk about how he gave them a start and he gave them encouragement and he helped them along. And I think the most fitting legacy any of us can have for his memory is to give somebody a break career-wise, to encourage someone in their career, a young person perhaps, and then to disagree with those people on the other side of the aisle in an agreeable fashion and bring back some civility in his honor, because he always did it with a smile and a joke.
Yeah.
I think that's something we need more of today, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We do have one more minute if anybody else wanted to add anything.
Well, one of the things I will take a few seconds, I know Phil and Martha may have something to say as well, and Melita, but the one thing that really always impressed me about Dick is what Melita said, is his humor. I mean, when I would debate him and Phil, and he would, author the show, say, hey, don't get so angry, make sure you remember to smile. And I'm glad you mentioned that he was a great husband, his wife, Becky, who I know he loved, and his daughters, and so definitely just want to say that he was just a great man, and I know he loved being a high school basketball referee. That's what he talked about a lot with me. He knew the high school I went to, so definitely he had some good stories.
Well, very quickly, I want to commend Fox 5 Atlanta, because the management is carrying on Dick's dream and vision for this show. It's the longest running public show, public service show, and this is what it should be all about. You've got diverse opinions. That's what it was designed to have. So we do information, but we also have opinions, and so it's been a great run, and it was all due to Dick.
All right. Thank you all, and thank you for joining us. We will be back next week.